The recent developments with James Harden in Philadelphia have created one of the weirdest trades of all time ever to look back on. When we go back and look at James Harden getting traded in exchange for Ben Simmons, that whole situation is so weird now. And the place that I have to start is that trade really never should have happened in the first place for Philadelphia. The only reason that they needed to trade Ben Simmons at all was because he requested a trade, because he refused to show up and play for the team. And somehow Philly managed to trade him for someone else that is refusing to show up and refusing to play for the team. When you go back to that postseason right before Ben Simmons requested a trade, Philadelphia was a heavy favorite in that series against Atlanta. Then of course Ben Simmons passes up the layup at the rim. They end up losing to Atlanta in a series they should have won 100 out of 100 times, and that is what started them on this path where not only do they trade away Ben Simmons for Harden, they somehow salvage that situation, but now they're dealing with an unhappy James Harden in Philadelphia as well. And looking back on that deal and how it's impacted both Brooklyn as well as Philadelphia is just an unbelievable thing to do, because prior to all of this craziness in the offseason with Harden requesting, a trade out of Philadelphia, opting in, maybe Daryl Morey did or didn't say that he was going to find Harden a trade if he did opt in, or maybe Daryl Morey did or didn't say last offseason that if he took a pay cut, he was going to give him a big contract this offseason. Whatever the issues are between Morey and Harden, it's clear that that relationship is just not salvageable. And the craziest part of that is Philadelphia, not that long ago, looked like the best team in the Eastern Conference. They looked like the team that could represent the East in the finals. They were up 3-2 against Boston. That was their moment. They had it in front of them. All they had to do was win one game, go to the conference finals. They still would have been favorites even against a very tough Miami team, and they still couldn't do it. And that to me is the legacy of the Harden-Simmons trade for Philadelphia, is that yes, now it looks really bad because Harden wants out, but it could have worked. It could have worked out perfectly. And you have to put yourself in the mindset of how everything was when the Ben Simmons trade discussions were happening in the first place, because the idea that Philadelphia was going to get someone as good as James Harden in exchange for Ben Simmons was impossible. By the time they actually made the deal, no one understood how they even got there in the first place, because Simmons requests the trade, doesn't show up, and the trade offers that they were getting in exchange were like, there was a Tyrese Halliburton and some stuff trade offer before we knew that Tyrese Halliburton was going to be as good as he was. There was like some CJ McCollum stuff out there from Portland. The offers weren't that great, and then because Harden sabotaged his situation in Brooklyn and became available as an impending free agent, that was what they were able to salvage, was getting James Harden. And that was an incredible deal for them. There were people that were saying that Philadelphia was the favorite to win the title after they made that deal, and it just hasn't worked out for them at all. And for Brooklyn, it's been pretty much the same story. This is one of those lose-lose situations for each team. Now, Ben Simmons is trying to show up and play for Brooklyn, but he was literally one of the worst players in the entire league last year in terms of guys that got actual minutes, and just a complete catastrophe when he was out there. And part of the reason that the KD Kyrie thing fell apart the way that it did, because they were waiting on him to come back mid-season after they traded for him the first year. That never happened. That created this weird distraction around the team, and then KD and Kyrie both won it out. Then they end up salvaging that. They go into the season, and Ben Simmons not being available and being really bad when he was out there, and the contrast of that compared to when Harden was there, when Harden, Kyrie, and KD all played, they were basically unstoppable. To then trade that guy away for someone in Simmons that was terrible, couldn't do anything on the floor. That contrast really, I think, was what initiated the other KD trade request, and of course Kyrie as well, in the middle of the year. Now, you could argue that things are actually working out better for Brooklyn at this point than they are for Philadelphia, because even though Ben Simmons doesn't have a lot of value, he could still be, a decent player this year. And even if he's not, in a couple of years, that contract is going to come off, and they still got some draft compensation from Philadelphia, including one all the way going out to 2027, and some other stuff that at least is able to help them. Whereas for Philly, Harden could leave, they could get nothing for him, next offseason, they could trade him for not a whole lot, and their situation is much more dire because they're constantly concerned about the happiness of Joel Embiid in Philadelphia. Brooklyn doesn't have that problem. Now, the reason that Philly has that problem is because they're just significantly better as a team right now than Brooklyn is, but somehow, after a year where it looked like a complete disaster of a trade for Brooklyn, you could actually argue that they're on the better side of it now because they actually got other stuff rather than just a straight up player for player Simmons for Harden swap. And to me, the craziest part of all of this is that if you told Philly fans at the time they traded away Simmons, they get Harden, if you told them that Harden was also going to quit on the team, that he also was going to refuse to show up and play, and that once again, for the second time in a few seasons for Joel Embiid, the second best player on the team is just refusing to play, they would have lost their minds. There's no way that they would have believed that would actually happen. This is an unprecedented situation. Just for Simmons the first time to just not show up, to refuse to play, that was unprecedented in the first place. But then to trade him for a guy that does the exact same thing not too much longer, not only is insane to think about, but also makes you question what exactly is happening in Philadelphia, what's happening in the front office, what's happening within the organization that is allowing for these kinds of situations to occur. Obviously, it's not entirely their fault. Simmons's, mentality towards that whole situation probably wasn't approached very well. Sixers, of course, made some mistakes there as well, and same thing with Harden. Both parties have made mistakes, but it's just crazy that of all the teams in the league, of all the players in the league, there's only been two different guys that have just refused to show up and play. And both of them have played for Philadelphia, and both of them got traded for each other. I'm confident in saying that will never, ever happen again. And what I want to know down in the comment section below is what you guys think about who ends up winning this trade, whether it be now, whether it be in the future. Who comes out on top in this deal? Do you think that maybe Philly gets some stuff for Harden in the future and then that helps them down the line, or Harden comes back this year and Philly's really good? Do you think Brooklyn gets something from Simmons? Maybe Simmons comes back and is better this year? Or is it just a lose-lose? Is it just one of those trades where a team traded something for something else and it didn't help anybody? They both might as well have not even done the trade. And honestly, I'm kind of leaning towards that last one. And the thing that I will always come back to with this deal, even 10 years from now, is people are going to forget. People are just going to assume that things didn't go well in Philadelphia and Harden won it out, and whatever the resolution to this situation is, that's what people are going to focus on. Whether he leaves as a free agent, whether he signs a new contract, whether he gets traded away, they're always just going to focus on that. And instead, what they should be focusing on is the fact that in games 6 and 7, Philadelphia had an opportunity to win one game, make the conference finals, and everything is different. I know that there are contractual issues between Harden and the organization, and supposedly that is what has caused this whole situation of him refusing to show up and play, him requesting a trade. All that stuff stems from this contract situation. I understand that. But if Philly makes the conference finals or the finals, if they win game 6, if they don't get destroyed in game 7 against Boston, if they finally get over that hump, they finally make that leap, I'm confident that whatever contract issues there were that caused this disagreement in the first place would not have happened. Philadelphia, had they made the conference finals or the finals, would not be able to go to James Harden and say, hey, you know what? It's really cool that we had all this success, but we're only able to offer you like $20 million a year. They wouldn't have done that. One of the reasons that they decided reportedly to not even offer him a contract is because he was terrible in all but like 3 games in that series, and that's the history of Harden in the postseason. He had moments in the postseason where he was unbelievable, and then he had moments where he was like 2 for 11 with 7 turnovers and just didn't play particularly well, and that's what he does. And that's the legacy of this deal. It's not the Simmons situation in Brooklyn. It's not how Harden eventually ends up in Philadelphia. It's game 6 and 7 of this most recent postseason and the opportunities that Philadelphia had to finally make this move of all the moves that they made in the process era, moving up and down the draft, moving up to get Markelle Fultz, that not working, moving him, getting Tyrese Maxey, trading for Jimmy Butler, then trading away Jimmy Butler, then bringing in James Harden. All those moves that they've made, the legacy of this comes down to their failure to step up to make the necessary plays to make that leap in game 6 and 7 of the postseason. That's the legacy of the Harden Simmons trade. Not the disaster that it could end up being for both teams, but a failure to take advantage of an opportunity that was in front of them. Regardless of how the situation has turned out now, they absolutely could have been a championship or very close to championship team.